All right, so the movie we reviewed for our BUS 330 managerial decision making presentation is The Insiders. Our group members include Elizabeth Case, Caitlin Evans, Stephanie Harper, myself, Logan Leslie, Jennifer Pettigrew, and Jennifer Wilson. And on the next slide, we have some more information about the movie. It was directed by Michael Mann, who's known for other movies such as The Last of the Mohicans and Will Smith's Ali. It was produced by Michael Mann and Peter Jan Brugge. It was written by Eric Roth and Michael Mann. It's based on the novel The Man Who Knew Too Much by Marie Brenner. It stars Al Pacino, Russell Crowe, Christopher Plummer, Diane Venora, Philip Baker Hall, Lindsay Krause, and Debbie Mazar. The music was done by Lisa Gerard and Peter Bork. Cinematography was done by Dante Spinati. It was edited by William Goldenberg, Paul Rubel, and David Rosenblum. Distributed by Buena Vista Pictures. It was released November 5th, 1999. Its runtime is 157 minutes. The budget was $68 million, and it did $60.2 million in the box office. Some more information. So it was released in approximately 1,800 theaters on November 5th, 1999, where it grossed a total of $6,712,361 on its opening weekend, which ranked fourth in the country for that time period. It went on to make $29.1 million in North America and $31.2 million in the rest of the world, for a total of $60.3 million, which was significantly lower than its $90 million budget it had. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, so including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, and Best Film Editing and Best Sound, but it didn't win any of the 7. Now we have the movie trailer.
You go public and 30 million people hear what you gotta say. Nothing, I mean nothing, will ever be the same again.
Now, the work we did here is confidential, not for public scrutiny, any more than our one's family matters. We're very serious about protecting our interests.
He's got something to say, he wants to say it, I want it on 60 Minutes.
Maybe for the audience, it's just voyeurism, something to do on a Sunday night, and maybe it won't change a thing. And people like myself and my family are left hung out to dry, used up, alone.
What does this guy have to say
Don't be paranoid, Jed.
that threatens these people?
That isn't cigarettes are bad for you.
Who is this?
They have no right to hide behind a corporate agreement. He can talk, we can air it.
The worst kind of an organized smear campaign against a whistleblower.
Shoplifting, failing to pay child support.
They can paint everything with that brush. What are you going to do now? You're going to finesse me? Lawyer me some more? Try Mr. Wallace.
If we aired this segment,
I was told,
Don't talk.
mind my own business.
we could be a grave risk.
We're doing this with or without you, Lowell.
Are you a businessman or are you a newsman? He's only the key witness in the biggest public health reform issue in U.S. history. Does he go on television and tell the truth? Yes. Is it newsworthy? Yes. Are we going to air it? Of course not. Why? Because he's not telling the truth? No, because he is telling the truth. And the more truth he tells, the worse it gets.
You manipulated me into this.
I fought for you, and I still fight.
The American public need to know.
Jeffrey?
And you wish you hadn't come forward?
Dr. Wagner's deposition will be part of this record.
You wish you hadn't blown the whistle?
Do I think it's worth it?
I told the truth. It's valid and true and
To these people, that's not the point whether you tell the truth or not.
Next, we have the characters, the key characters impacted the most by the events in the movie. You have Lowell Bergman, who was played by Al Pacino, as a producer for the CBS investigative news series 60 Minutes. Russell Crowe was nominated for quite a few awards for his role as Jeff Wigand, a recently terminated VP of Research and Development for Brown and Williamson. Mike Wallace, an award-winning journalist and star of 60 Minutes, was played by Christopher Plummer. We also have a secondary character, Leanne Wigand, Jeff Wigand's wife, who's played by Diane Vernora. Next slide.
I'm going to give just a brief summary to give a little more detail about the events in the film. The Insider movie is based on a true story about a man named Jeffrey Wigand who lost his job at Brown and Williamson, which was one of the largest tobacco companies in the United States. Wigand says that he was fired because he refused to use a substance in their products that would make the tobacco more addictive. After Wigand is fired, he moves his family and begins working as a teacher. He then agrees to work with Lowell Bergman, who is a producer on the show 60 Minutes at CBS. The two fought to air Wigand's interview on one of the TV show segments that would expose the tobacco company after executive claims they did not believe the cigarettes were addictive. Wigand says they knew the negative aspects of the product and were even agreeing to the use of a substance that was believed to be carcinogenic. According to Wigand, the addictiveness of the product was common knowledge within the company. If Wigand did give the information about the company, he'd be breaking the confidentiality agreement that he signed while working for Brown and Williamson, and this would cause him to lose his severance and put additional financial strain on his family. Wigand and Bergman run into many obstacles throughout this journey. Wigand notices that someone has trespassed on his property, he gets a disturbing phone call, eventually loses his family, and receives a gag order. Bergman at one point was told he was no longer able to air the interview because of a possible lawsuit between CBS and Brown and Williamson. He was then told he needed to take a vacation. In the end, the interview was able to be aired, exposing all the information that Wigand had on the tobacco company, and he eventually testified in court, not following the gag order and risking potential jail time. The first theory that we would like to discuss in relation to the film is the utilitarian theory. The utilitarian theory is one of the philosophical approaches to ethical decision-making. According to dictionary.com, utilitarianism is the ethical doctrine that virtue is based on utility, and that conduct should be directed toward promoting the greatest happiness of the greatest number of persons. A simple example of this would be if a company needed to decrease spending in order to thrive. One way they might do that is to let go of some of their employees. And even though the decision would negatively impact the employees who are going to lose their jobs, there would be more of a positive impact than negative because it would allow the business to survive and would save the jobs of a larger group of people. While discussing this theory in the textbook, the term consequentialism is mentioned. Consequentialism is also based on the utility coming from decisions that are made. It says that a decision is morally correct only if the decision maximizes the net good of the situation. Since both of these terms focus on the end result of a decision, they can be referred to as teleological, which is the study of ends. The difference between the two terms is that consequentialism is based on a subset of a range of variance when it comes to ethical decision-making. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, grasps such a wide variety of variance, which makes it only partially useful when you face a problematic situation or making ethical decisions. In the movie, we can see this theory come into play with many of the events. The first example would be Wigand working to expose the tobacco company. Doing so could lead to many consequences for the character. He could lose his severance pay that he gets from the company after being fired, which will not just affect him, but his family as well. Then he and his family begin receiving death threats at their home, and an employee from the Wall Street Journal attempts to ruin his credibility to the public. Eventually, he also comes home to his wife and 2 daughters, having left because all of the stress his decision is putting on the family. The court goes on later to issue a gag order against Weigand, which could result in possible jail time if he testifies or speaks out. Bergman is also fighting alongside Weigand to expose the company when CBS no longer wants to air the interview. CBS corporate decides to pull the interview because of a possible lawsuit against them from Brown and Williamson. But Bergman thinks they're really canceling the interview because of the potential sale of the company. If CBS airs the interview, the sale will not go through, causing the loss of that income for the corporate employees of the company. Bergman then decides to confront the president of CBS and then is told to take his vacation. Both of these situations are showing examples of utilitarianism because each character is willing to take the consequences of their actions for the good of the public. They're both working to do what is best for the greatest number of people, no matter what impacts they're experiencing themselves. The positive outcome should outweigh the negative when embracing the utilitarian theory in ethical decision-making. Both Weigand and Bergman believe the best decision is to expose the tobacco company. When considering a resolution to the problem in relation to the utilitarian theory, we believe it is unnecessary because both of the main characters already utilize this theory in their decision-making in the movie. But I would like to note that there were a couple parties who did not work in accordance with this theory when making the decisions in the film. These were the two companies, Brown and Williamson and CBS. Brown and Williamson decided to use the substance in their tobacco products that would increase the addictiveness of the product even after telling the public they believed that they were not to be addictive. This only benefits the company in hopes of raising their revenue. And then the situation with CBS is similar because they do what is best to raise money for the company by not airing the interview. Since we believe that Weigand and Bergman have already acted in accordance with the theory, though, we're just going to discuss the legalities, costs, and impacts in relation to Weigand's experience of applying utilitarianism to his decision-making. So first, to discuss the legalities, Weigand had signed a confidentiality agreement with his previous employer, stating that he would not share his knowledge of the company. Then later, a gag order was issued against Weigand to keep him from speaking or testifying. Both the confidentiality agreement and the gag order are legally binding documents that Weigand could suffer serious consequences from breaking. As for the costs, if Weigand breaks the confidentiality agreement, he would lose the severance package he began receiving after being fired from Brown and Williamson. After losing his job, his family is already going through a difficult time financially, and losing his severance would increase the strain. Also, one of the possible repercussions of breaking a confidentiality agreement could be that the company may seek monetary damages from the party who broke the contract. There are also multiple impacts Weigand faced as an outcome for his decision. One of these was the eventual loss of his family. He knew that his wife was not happy with the consequences they were experiencing after he decided to pursue exposing the company, but he decided to continue anyway. This led to him coming home one day with his wife and children gone. After receiving the gag order, Weigand finds out that he could go to jail if he breaks the order by testifying, which he struggled with for a little bit, but eventually goes to court and risks being arrested. Despite all the obstacles,
Today, I will be discussing the ethical theory of deontology as it is shown in the movie The Insider. Deontology is defined as an ethical theory that the morality of an action should be based on whether the action is right or wrong under a series of rules, rather than based on the consequences of the action. It focuses on the rightness or wrongness of actions. It is best explained by telling the truth because you know it's the right thing to do. When someone is acting under deontology ethics, they make decisions based solely on their actions with no regard of the consequences. To better understand the deontology theory, it is best to be explained in a way for everyone to understand, with a little comic relief from the ever so famous Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin. Today at school, I tried to decide whether to cheat on my test or not. I wondered, is it better to do the right thing and fail, or is it better to do the wrong thing and succeed? On one hand, undeserved success given no satisfaction, but on the other hand, well-deserved failure gives no satisfaction either. Of course, most everybody cheats sometime, or other people always bend the rules if they think they can get away with it. Then again, that doesn't justify my cheating. Then I thought, look, cheating on one little test isn't such a big deal. It doesn't hurt anyone. But then I wondered if I was just rationalizing my unwillingness to accept the consequences of not studying. Still, in the real world, people care about success, not principles. Then again, maybe that's why the world is such a mess. What a dilemma. Hobbes. So what did you decide? Calvin. Nothing. I ran out of time and I had to turn in a blank paper. Hobbes. Any more simply acknowledging the issue is a moral victory. Calvin. Well, it just seemed wrong to cheat on my ethics test. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I thought it was fitting for the class and the explanation. Next slide, please. Wigan joined the company as a scientist to Brown and Williamson to create a less addictive cigarette. When Brown and Williamson wanted him to create a cigarette with more addiction to increase profit, he was faced with an ethical dilemma. He knew it was wrong, but his company was pushing him to against his ethics. Some examples from the movie shown through the deontology theory. Example 1. Bergman decided to tell his story to the New York Times. He wanted to air to the public that Wigan was telling the truth and that CBS was not wanting to air the true story due to the fact that Brown and Williamson were threatening litigation if the truth were aired regarding what Wigan knew. Bergman was acting according to deontologists. Bergman was doing what he thought was the right thing to do. He had previously given his word to Wigan that he would follow him through and would help him until the end. Bergman was not concerned at all with the consequences of airing the truth, losing his job, or any other consequences. He based his decision solely on the fact that he knew it was the right thing to do. Another example from the movie is when Bergman was confronted in corporate's office and told that they were not going to air Wigan's story. It was brought to light that Brown and Williamson had threatened litigation if they aired the story. Bergman at that point stood up for what he knew was the right thing to do. He defended Wigan and his story. Next, I'll read a little actual quote from the movie. Bergman explains, "You pay me to go get guys like Wigan, to draw him out, to get him to trust us, to go get him to go on television. I do. I deliver him. He sits. He talks. He violates his own confidentiality agreement. And he's the only key witness in the biggest public health reform issue, maybe the biggest, most expensive corporate case in U.S. history. And Jeffrey Wigan, who's out on the limb, does he go on television and tell the truth? Yes. Is it newsworthy? Yes. Are we going to air it? Of course not. Why? Because he's not telling the truth. No, because he is telling the truth. That's why we're not going to air it. And the more truth he tells, the worse it gets. In this example, Bergman displays his true passion for the truth being told and following through with his word to Wigan and standing by his side until the story is aired. In another example from the movie, Wigan questions his duty to notify the public of the increased amount of nicotine making cigarettes more addicting and lethal, or his corporate binding obligation to his employer and not breach his contract. During the interview with Wigan and Wallace for the CBS special, Wallace questions his decision and whether he regrets coming forward with his knowledge of the actual truth. Another actual quote from the movie. Wallace. And do you wish you hadn't come forward? Do you wish you hadn't blown the whistle? Wigan. There are times when I wish I hadn't done it. There are times when I feel compelled to do it. If you ask me, would I do it again? Do I think it's worth it? Yes, I think it's worth it. Even after Dr. Wigan went through the emotional toll of threats to his family, his wife and children leaving him, threat of jail time, lawsuits, he still went through with airing the truth to the public. He needed a clear conscience, knowing the truth about the harmful chemicals adding to the cigarettes for the sake of the public's health, even if it cost him his family. Next slide, please. Resolution. Wigan and Bergman acted as the theory would suggest. They both told the truth regardless of the consequences because they knew it was the right thing to do. In the end, it cost them a lot. It cost them family, severance package, health benefits, being sued, lawsuits, possible jail time. In the end, Wigan went through with all of this so he could have a clear conscience, knowing the truth had been aired and the public knew the dangers of the addiction. If they would have acted against the theory, Wigan would have a heavy conscience knowing that the cigarettes were enhanced with nicotine from impact boosting as a major health concern to the public. Tobacco users would have suffered in the long run, not knowing the hidden additive. Brown and Williamson would have continued with their company and grown in sales and profit. Wigan's confidentiality agreement would have stayed intact. He would have kept his severance package and health benefits. In the end, you have to question yourself. Does the emotional toll the situation takes on yourself, your family, with the constant threats and harassments worth it, all for the sake of the public's knowledge of extreme health hazards? I would have agreed with Wigan. Yeah, it's worth it. This will conclude part 1 of our ethical analysis of the movie The Insider. Stay tuned.
Right. The next ethical theory we'd like to discuss is virtue ethics as related to the movie The Insider. Quoting the definition from the book, virtue ethics focuses on the moral character of the decision maker rather than the consequences of the action, as in utilitarianism, or the motivation of the decision maker, which is deontology. Basically, it means that every person is different. The virtues are shaped by various experiences throughout their lives that mold their personalities and moral character. This in turn affects their ethical decision-making process. 2 very important virtues that should be present for all business people are honesty and integrity. These are also 2 key ethical dilemmas presented in the movie The Insider. The tobacco industry was perpetrating a fraud against the American public. In an effort to conceal the health risks of smoking and the addictive nature of nicotine from their consumers, key executives in the tobacco industry went so far as to give false testimony before the House Subcommittee on Health and Environment in April of 1994. This shows a considerable lack of honesty and integrity when you consider that these executives were willing to lie to the public to maintain sales of carcinogenic, highly addictive, cancer-causing product, just so the industry could continue to make money. One of the drawbacks of virtue ethics in a business setting is that many feel you should leave your personal values out of your business decision-making process. But the problem with that is demonstrated pretty clearly here. The moral character of these executives when they made their decisions was obviously very poor. Their only motivation was greed, which is not a virtuous quality. The product was hurting people and they knew it, but refused to disclose it, which isn't right for a person or for a business. But I guess we have to consider maybe their own virtues are different than everyone else's. Did they feel they were actually doing the right thing and honor bound to defend their business at the cost of everything else, including public health? Can it be justified if you're hurting people? A great example of virtue ethics in a business scenario is from the book and the lectures. CEO James Burke of Johnson & Johnson didn't put his company above the lives of the public when cyanide poisonings became linked to Tylenol. The company's response was notable for its honesty. They stopped all advertising and removed Tylenol from the market, even though it was clear that it wasn't Johnson & Johnson's fault. The products had been tampered with by an outside party. It cost the company millions of dollars and probably weakened consumer faith in their products temporarily. But in the end, the CEO made a choice based on his moral values, and it showed great integrity. Another example, which is completely fictional, but I just happened to see it recently, it's pure coincidence, but it ties in so well to this theory I wanted to mention it. In an episode of the television series West Wing, which was created by Aaron Sorkin and was on the air from 1999 to 2006, in season 3, episode 19, called Enemies, Foreign and Domestic, a friend of President Jed Bartlett and his chief of staff, Leo McGarry, owns a computer chip company that just discovered one of their products was faulty and would fail after so many uses. He feels he needs to follow his moral code. He needs to do what's right, be honest with the public. This means issuing a recall, even though it would devastate the company financially. There are numerous factors involved with the government bailing out a single company, and the president doesn't think there's anything they can do to help. But Leo wants to support them somehow. His argument basically boiled down to this: isn't this how we want all American business owners to act? There are numerous ethical issues in this movie, but 3 stand out as relating to virtue ethics. You can go to the next slide. First, was it ethical for Jeff to break his confidentiality agreement in the interest of public safety, or was he just angry at being fired and wanted revenge? As has been mentioned before, Jeff Wigan was VP of Research and Development and was fired from Brown & Williamson Tobacco Company when he asked to pursue a safer cigarette and to alert the public to the hazards. He was also forced to sign a confidentiality agreement, which would prevent him from sharing the damaging information he had been gathering during his time at B&W. Jeff's ethical dilemma was whether or not to break his confidentiality agreement, a legal and binding document, in order to share the truth with the public and expose the health risks associated with smoking. Not only would he be breaking his word and defying a legal and binding document, but he would put his family at risk by losing his severance, health care, and possibly go to jail. So which virtue was strongest here for him? He knew the tobacco company was hurting people and he could do something about it. Did he feel honor-bound to maintain his promise to stay quiet per the confidentiality agreement? Or did he feel morally obligated to expose the damaging truth to the public? Or was he just angry at being fired? In the end, I think he helped so many people by bringing this fraud into the open. Whether he was angry at being fired or not, I think he had to follow his own moral path, which started with attempting to fix the problem within the industry while he still worked there. And then after he was fired, when it didn't work, he moved on to exposing the problem so that others could fix it. The second question, was it ethical for Lowell to persuade Jeff to break his confidentiality agreement just to get a good story? Or did he feel the end justified the means? Lowell Bergman was a producer for 60 Minutes who caught wind of the story and convinced Jeff to go public in an interview. Once he did this, the network, CBS, backed away, claiming fear of litigation. Lowell could have easily moved on to the next story, but he felt morally obligated to stand by Jeff after the network had basically left him exposed and vulnerable. He went over and above, using every tactic he could think of to make sure Jeff's reputation wasn't ruined and that the story was told in its entirety. In the end, he was one of the few people who stayed loyal to Jeff, and this showed great integrity on his part. He protested the lack of loyalty in his own organization by leaving the network after all was said and done. He felt he could no longer do his job according to his virtue standards if the network was going to interfere as they did. He felt strongly his sources needed to be able to rely on him 100% for honesty and integrity. Final question, was it ethical for CBS to air an edited version betraying Jeff and the public, or did the executives do the right thing in protecting their own interests as well as the networks? Brown & Williamson threatened a $15 billion lawsuit against CBS if they aired the interview. CBS was afraid of the possibility of being sued for tortious interference. The quote, "the bigger the truth, the greater the damage," stuck with me. General counsel claimed that if the information was true, then it belonged to the tobacco companies, not the general public. That seems like a kind of a ridiculous statement coming from a news agency. Meanwhile, the CBS general counsel and the president of CBS News stood to earn a profit of $3.9 million and $1.4 million, respectively, if this merger with Westinghouse went through. I think their consideration for editing the interview was solely related to their future income. Under no circumstances should a news agency or news executives be able to edit the news, especially if they know it to be the truth, just to protect their own interests. I think in the end, the main dilemma for all concerned was the danger posed to an unsuspecting public, whether or not to inform them. I believe Jeff and Lowell were doing what they felt where they were morally obligated to do. Lawsuits against the tobacco industry by Mississippi and 49 other states were settled for $246 billion. From a personal and moral standpoint, I believe the tobacco industry deserved the retribution they received for their damage and for causing damage they were causing to the health of their consumers and for their lack of integrity in this entire situation. Next slide. There were a couple of possible alternatives. If Jeff had decided that confidentiality was more important, then the public could still be in the dark as far as the tobacco industry was concerned. They may have continued to find ways to make their products more addictive and dangerous, continued to experiment with different chemicals, and it could get worse. On a personal note, Jeff probably would not have lost his family. There wouldn't have been any threats, no stress, no anxiety. He probably wouldn't have been fired, and his family would have been left alone. If Lowell Bergman had not decided to push Jeff to break his confidentiality and tried to get the story published, again, public would still be in the dark. On the other hand, I'm sure he runs into sources who back out all the time. He probably would have attempted to find a different source for this story as it was a threat to the public, and I have to believe he'd want to reveal it. But eventually, he most likely would have moved on to the next story and probably still be employed at CBS. If CBS had decided to air the full segment rather than an edited version, they would not have been publicly shamed as having edited the news when the full story broke, which probably hurt them more in the end than if they had just aired the original segment. Once they had this story and saw the damage tobacco could do to the public, there shouldn't have been a question. News agencies have an obligation to report the news. There's a lack of both honesty and integrity on the part of the executives who wanted to preserve the sale of the network and their bonuses. Next slide.
Okay, so kind of bouncing off the previous ethical theory of virtue ethics, more specifically, we have corporate integrity. Corporate integrity is another pressing issue that we see relating to this movie and also just in the real world in general. The true definition is a state or condition in which the objectives of the managers and the shareholders of a corporation are undivided and complete. The compensation of the managers and the shareholders is selected as a subset of the objectives. So in layman's terms, corporate integrity is about corporations being honest and consistent with their actions, values, methods, measures, principles, expectations, and outcomes. Consistency is about being the same regardless of the situation. So an example of corporation being consistent would be where the CEO of the company kept the employees up to date on the struggles of the business they were experiencing with clear and frequent communication at team meetings. Employees felt as if they knew exactly what was happening. They were not blindsided by the CEO's request that they take a 10% pay cut so that the company could avoid layoffs for the time being. The employees also felt confident in the turnaround plan that they were following as they had helped develop it, and they trusted their CEO. An example of a corporation being inconsistent is being hypocritical in the sense of a CEO believing in creating a culture of love and equality, but at the same time will belittle or look down upon the junior employees working in the company. Integrity comes from the word integer, meaning whole and complete. This requires an inner sense of wholeness and consistency of character. You would be able to see someone's integrity simply by just observing their actions. So now in a more business sense, integrity is now becoming crucial for businesses in order for them to succeed. Companies that have a foundation built on trust and honesty will not only attract the best employees and customers, but will reduce the costs associated with doing business and compliance. Essentially, corporate integrity is all about the choices people make within the business and how a business can be organized and structured to where people will most likely make the right choices. With that being said, in the movie The Insider, there is very little corporate integrity being shown by the employees of the tobacco company Brown & Williamson. The CEOs of Big Tobacco are well aware of the negative effects tobacco has on the health of humans, but doesn't want Dr. Wygant, which, as we stated before, Dr. Wygant is the former research biologist for Brown and Williamson. The Big Tobacco doesn't want Dr. Wygant to reveal that information on CBS's 60 Minutes. It shows the true corruption in the tobacco industry because they all know that tobacco causes negative health side effects such as risks of cancer and exposure to toxic chemicals, but they don't care because they are making money. So as long as consumers are in the dark about the effects, they will continue to buy tobacco. The tobacco industry also fails to disclose that they're actually adding more nicotine in order to get consumers to buy more and more tobacco. So even if consumers realize that tobacco is harmful to the human body, they will continue to buy because of the amount of addictive nicotine in it. In the movie, Dr. Wygant admits to the harmful effects of tobacco in his testimony by saying, this is a direct quote from the movie, by saying, it produces a sociological response, which means the definition of a drug. Nicotine is associated with impact satisfaction and has a pharmacological effect that crosses the blood-brain barrier intact. What Big Tobacco didn't want the public to know is smoking tobacco causes exposure to a lethal mixture of more than 7,000 toxic chemicals, including at least 70 known carcinogens that can damage nearly every organ system in the human body. A regular lifelong smoker loses at least 10 to 11 years of life to tobacco on average. In addition, exposure to secondhand or environmental tobacco smoke is associated with increased risk of cancer and heart disease, among other deleterious health effects. The only way for an individual to completely eliminate tobacco-related harms is to just not use them. There are several categories of ethical dilemmas, and this one goes along with hiding or divulging information because the companies are failing to disclose safety concerns. I personally believe that covering up harmful effects, such as the ones found in using tobacco in order to make more money, is one of the top ethical issues found in a corporation that can really harm a business, ultimately leading to the lack of corporate integrity. You go next.
So another point of ethical dilemma that was presented in the movie is breaching of a confidentiality agreement. So we decided to do some more outside research on it. And first of all, I wanted to explain why someone might need a confidentiality agreement. So there are two different types. There are pre and post employment. But according to legalmatch.com, a breach of a confidentiality agreement may arise when a person discloses information that they are agreed to keep private. Confidentiality agreements are typically used in an employment setting when a hiring company doesn't want confidential business information leaked into the public. Now, according to a 1985 article by Maureen Callahan from the University of Chicago Law Review, she did a bunch of research on post-employment restraint agreements, and those are like the ones found in the movie This Insider, where someone is being terminated or let go, and then they are being asked to sign this agreement of confidentiality, and sometimes there are other terms in this agreement. The post-employment agreements are not as favorable as pre-employment ones in the court's eyes. Nowadays, these post-employment agreements are only enforced to the extent that a court finds the agreement reasonable and valid. In determining the reasonableness, the action of doing so extends court time and therefore increased litigation costs because they take more time to figure out if it's reasonable or not. According to this article from the University of Chicago Law Review, 3 things are found make a post-employment agreement unreasonable. If it is anti-competitive, it is possible that it is an unreasonable agreement, as well as if it is unfair, meaning if it underestimates the bargaining strength of the ex-employee, and if it is a threat to the economy, taking away that productive employee or productive worker out of society. Those employees that are being made to sign these agreements, though, are highly skilled and have lots of knowledge and are highly sophisticated, like that of Wygand in the movie. He's an executive, he's a VP. And most of the time, companies aren't making everyone they terminate sign these agreements. So it is those executives who have high levels of knowledge and usually have great bargaining potential because they were in an executive role. So with loads of sensitive information, the companies want to be more careful and make sure that they are covering themselves, but sometimes they can get into trouble post-employment because they're asking for too much. These post-employment agreements could allow unfair market power if they have long-term restraints. So there can be anywhere from 1 year to indefinitely or forever hereafter for an employee to not. Just one moment. Just a sound check real quick. Can anybody hear me? Going on then. 19th century judicial perspective was much stricter on holding those accountable in a contractual agreement. They said that unless there was physical duress, fraud, mental incapability, or infancy, traditional contract principles required an employee to live with the bargain he made, regardless of how disadvantaged the terms were. Nowadays, judges consider unconscionability or extreme unjust and one-sidedness at the time of contract making by the party with superior bargaining power, which would be the employer. This is just making sure that the power is not being held by the employer. There's no significant threats or intimidation. There is a court case that people may know, RRK Holding Company versus Sears Roebuck & Co. In 2008, $25 million was to be paid to RRK Holding Company from Sears because they used the marketing plans, exhibits, and prototypes that RRK Holding had shown them and given them during a consulting period as their own. And they had disclosed trade secrets to their companies, employers, and clients that were protected under the NDA and Illinois Trade Secrets Act. So that's quite a significant ruling and significant cost that is completely possible, and that happened quite recently in the past 10 years. But overall, the consequences of breaking a confidentiality agreement could be monetary, such as that in the case, could be disciplinary, such as termination if it is a pre-employment agreement, legal because it's a contract and can be held up in court, loss of benefits like Wygand was facing in the movie with his severance package. Now, you may have a defense to wanting to go ahead and break that confidentiality agreement, like Wygand wanting to go ahead and speak on 60 Minutes. If there's an illegal activity going on the company, which could have been the case with all of the health dangers to the public with the tobacco company. If the secrets being held under the contract are actually public knowledge and can be legally defined as such, and threats, which are a civil misconduct. Now, like I said, there are limits within these agreements between 1 year and indefinite, but you should always be able to find pre-employment how your company and employer feels about this and how they will go about in their ethical code. So as an ethical code that we had done all before this as a class, for British Columbia public service employees, they have a section on their website under their human resources and their ethical codes and their policies. They do a very good job by defining their essential terms such as confidentiality, lobbying, secrets, and contractual agreements. They also lay out before and after leaving employment so as to make clear conditions. And after this, they lay out even further specific conditions for confidentiality and anti-competitive actions, basically giving you scenarios. They give you the time frame of the contract, how long it is supposed to last, and then exceptions if your terms of termination are different, then your time limit may be extended more than 1 year, or it could be immediate. You could go talk to and be employed by a competitor. But the breach of a confidentiality agreement was super central to this ethical dilemma in our movie. So there were a lot of defenses and consequences.
So for my item of outside research, I wanted to see how the Brown and Williamson scandal kind of changed the tobacco industry. So after the whole scandal, the U.S. Justice Department actually started a lot of lawsuits against the big tobacco companies. And in 2006, Judge Gladys Kessler ruled that they would have to pay for and place truthful ads about the harmful effects of the tobacco use. The court actually specified over 50 newspapers that would carry the weekly ad, which included our local Northern Kentucky Herald. Also, the major networks like ABC, NBC, and CBS would also have to air the ads. What the tobacco companies did, though, they employed some really high-paid lawyers, and they delayed and complicated the litigation, and it ended up delaying it for over 11 years. So it started in 2006, and then the ads didn't start airing and stuff until November of 2017. And like some of the statements you might see in the ads include like the harmful effects of the tobacco use. Like cigarette companies actually control the impact and delivery of nicotine in many ways, including designing filters and selecting cigarette paper to maximize the ingestion of the nicotine. And they've added ammonia to make the cigarette taste less harsh, to make it taste better, and controlling the physical and chemical makeup. Also, you'll see how secondhand smoke can affect and kills 38,000 Americans each year. So many organizations have actually been created to expose the truth of the health effects of the use of tobacco. The one you see the most probably is like the truth ads from thetruth.com, which is actually geared towards like the younger demographic to stop the teenagers from smoking. Because their idea was if you stop kids smoking when they're young, they won't smoke as adults, and then their kids won't smoke, and it'll drop the percentage drastically. And also the CDC, which is the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, advertised a Tips from a Smoker campaign, which we actually have a clip here to show you.
I'm married, and I used to be a smoker. I want to give you some tips about getting ready in the morning. Brush your teeth, then wig, then your head redefined, and now you're ready for the day.
So, our final recommendation as a group was that the events that transpired in the movie were in accordance with each theory that we chose to analyze the film story through, and they were based on real life circumstances. So what actually happened is what all of the theories would have come to a solution. So through the utilitarian theory, the most good was done for the most people. They focused on consequences in order to make their decision. Deontology focuses on whether the action is right or wrong and the motivation of the decision maker. Virtue focuses on the morals, character, and values of the decision maker in order to figure out what to do. Wygand and Bergman decided to expose big tobacco for the greater good because it was the right thing to do, and good morals and values would drive someone to do the same.
The discussion questions that we have for you all are the ones that we believe will really get you to think and will leave a lot of room for open discussion. The first one is, how would you describe an insider or whistleblower? Discuss the motives behind informing the public on a corporation's/industry's corruption. Why would someone take such a risk? As you would see in the movie, this is the dilemma we see Dr. Wygand face. But why would anyone take such a risk to reveal the truth behind a corporation? Not just in the example, but in the not just the example in the movie, but anyone in general. The second question we have is, in the movie, Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company have a lot of stake in the public health, but they also have confidential corporate processes. This can create an environment of ethical gray areas and difficult decisions. Relating to corporate integrity, how can one structure a business where employees are more likely to make ethical choices? So as we talked about before regarding corporate integrity, it is very important for a business to structure themselves so that their employees are encouraged to make the best decisions. But what are some ways that a company can do that?
Perfect. So this concludes our presentation on the ethical analysis of the movie The Insider. Here are our sources here, and thank you for watching.